This is Software Engineering Radio, the podcast for professional developers on the web at se-radio.net. SE Radio is brought to you by the IEEE Computer Society and by IEEE Software Magazine. Online at computer.org/software. Developers, are you ready? It's time to upgrade your data platform to InterSystems Iris. Choose your language. Choose your tools. Choose your environment. Collaborate, build faster, and deploy more efficiently. When you can make faster decisions, there's no telling what you'll create. Ready, set, code. Start coding for free. Visit intersystems.com/try to try Iris.
Welcome to Software Engineering Radio. I'm your host, Gavin Henry, and today my guest is Brian Foy. Brian Foy is one of the most prolific authors in the Perl programming community. He's the author of Mastering Perl and Learning Perl 6, and the co-author of Learning Perl, Intermediate Perl, Perl Programming, Effective Perl Programming, and others. You get the idea. He helps people and companies use Perl through education, training, and consulting. And his latest book is about preparing for Perl 7. Brian, welcome to Software Engineering Radio. Is there anything I missed in your bio that you'd like to add?
Oh, no, I think people who interview me know more about what I've done than I can remember. I think you got most of it.
There's actually a lot of stuff online that you probably aren't aware of, but there's lots of good things to choose from there, so that's great. During the show, we'll be talking about Perl's history, use cases, successes, and what it's like now, with the rest of the show talking about Perl 7. But I'd like to start with an overview of where Perl came from, when you would reach for it. So, what is Perl, and is it like any other programming language?
Well, geez, you really have to go back in history to think about this. So the short story is that Perl started as a sort of a pet project of Larry Wall. He was doing some stuff to coordinate a bunch of machines as a sysadmin, and some of the tools he were using wasn't really cutting it to his satisfaction. So he started cobbling together this other thing. And he was taking bits from awk and sed and C and all sorts of other things to make this tool that worked for him. He released it, I think it was in 1987 on one of the Usenets groups, if anyone remembers what those are. And then from there, other people got involved and they started using it. And they added in Henry Spencer's regex engine. So, and that's where Perl really made its reputation, is this text processing stuff. From there, it went on to Perl 3. It was really popular. And then when they had it popular enough to make a book out of it, they bumped it up to Perl 4, and that's where that first Learning Perl came from. Larry Wall and Randall Schwartz really kicked this stuff off. And at that point, we were going through the dot-com boom. This was, late 80s, early 90s. People were doing all sorts of stuff to get their information onto the web, and Perl was a great way to do that. It didn't require a lot of learning or experience to do very simple things, and people were really attracted to that.
That's one of its famous sayings, isn't it? About things being simple.
Yeah, in fact, I think that's on the cover of one of my books. It's the make the simple things easy and the hard things possible. It was talking about this idea that if you do this all the time, you shouldn't have to type that much to do it. And if there are some things that are really tough, they should be tractable. They should be workable. You shouldn't have to spend a whole lot of time working on something. And for the casual programmer or the baby programmer, which a lot of people talked about at that time, that was perfect. And if you're looking back on this now, you've got to imagine that this is before something like PHP existed, which people often think is one of Perl's competitors, but it's now the tool that is sort of filling that gap where I just want to put this little teeny bit of text right here, and I don't care about anything else with programming. But that used to be really hard to do, and it was really hard to do before Perl.
At that time, there wasn't many languages that came with a PC or a Unix distribution, was there?
Oh, geez, the pain I remember having to install things on a new machine. Like today, you can just spin up a Docker and put anything you want on it practically for free. Almost no investment in time. But back then, if you installed an operating system, you got this very bare thing. And then you had to say, okay, well, let's look at my notebook and see what I want. Okay, how am I going to install this? How am I going to install this? I remember I would actually buy a CD from a third-party vendor of all the stuff I wanted on my Solaris machine. It was already prepackaged. I mean, now you just get that from your package manager. It just sort of comes with it. But I don't remember what else I was using at the time. I was a scientist, so Fortran was a big thing. And
That's still a big thing, isn't it? That's
well, yeah, you don't want to change the programs because nobody knows how they work.
yeah, the kids today don't know how easy they've got it, do they?
We just get to harder and harder problems.
Yeah.
But Perl was revolutionary for its time in the way it handled things and the way it was more for the masses than for the people who are going to do this every day, all day.
So I think you've touched on the fact that it can be simple for those that want it to be simple, but it can stay with you and grow with you. That's the sort of message I'm hearing.
Yeah, it's the more you get into it, the more power you have. But you don't have to get all the way into it just to get a little bit of power. Not to throw aspersions on any other sort of language, but one of my friends is learning Haskell right now, and that's you have to do quite a bit of work and sort of buy into a whole lot of stuff to be useful in that language. But that's fine. That's the way they're doing things, and that's the way that thing is set up. Perl, not so much. Here, you can read this book in a day. You can be writing programs that might be solving some of your small problems, and then you don't have to think about it so much. We don't particularly care if you are a full-time Perl programmer.
And it's one of a handful of languages that come with your Linux distribution, or does it come on Mac OS?
Yeah, well, Perl comes with the Mac, as does Ruby and Python, but Apple has said that they're going to try to get rid of the scripting languages as part of the default install, which I think makes sense for them. They've been slimming down their core installation and stuff like that. I don't know how that's going to shake out for people who just assume that it's there. It's very easy to install Perl as well as Python and Ruby if you want it, but you have to know that you want it. People might be running programs and they don't even know what the language is in. So we'll see how that goes, but I'm sure there'll be some way that at least the Perl community will respond to that and make that really easy for those people who suddenly find it's not there anymore.
Does it come with its own interpreter or compiler? How does that language actually work?
There's Perl. So if we just start from sort of the bare metal, Perl is an interpreter and a compiler all at the same time. I don't want to get too technical with that. Basically, you write a program in a text file, and we don't particularly care what editor you use. We don't make you use an IDE or any sort of particular environment. That text file is given to this thing we call the interpreter. But what it really does is two things. It's going to go through your program and look at it and make it into some sort of intermediate representation. And that's the point where you're going to find out about all your syntax errors and other sort of wacky things. And then once it's done that and it's had a complete look at everything that you're going to do, that same program is going to then run whatever you've told it to do. So this is all sort of happening in one step. For people who've been around, they might be used to something like Java, where you compile something and you end up with some stuff, and then you hand that stuff to something else to actually run it, or pass it around and someone can run it without the compilation step. We don't have that in Perl. It's the same thing that does the interpretation and the running, which means you need Perl somehow to actually run the program. There's various ways that people have come up with to package Perl if you want to distribute it and you don't know if they have it or not. But for the most part, that one thing that we call the Perl interpreter is handling both of those jobs.
And that's generally Perl with a lowercase p is the interpreter, isn't it?
Yes. So this is a funny bit of history. When we talk about Perl, the language, we mostly use an uppercase P, then P, lowercase e, lowercase r, lowercase l. But it hasn't always been that way. If you look back at the first books on Perl, Learning Perl and Programming Perl, and these had the pink covers. These were some of the first O'Reilly nutshell books. They both had lowercase Perl, the whole word, on it. Because it wasn't until later that I think Randall Schwartz decided that he was going to distinguish between the two. There's a language, which we're going to make this proper noun, uppercase P, Perl. And then there's the interpreter, which is the name of the program that sits there on your computer and does things. And since most programs have all lowercase names, we're just going to call that all lowercase Perl, which is one of the tougher things to do when you're writing about Perl, like Randall and I have done in many books, and is decide which of those fit what you're trying to say when you say Perl. Are you talking about the language, or are you talking about a specific action of this thing that's going to run your program? Sometimes it's not so clear. it's actually sort of surprising.
Thanks. You mentioned Perl lowercase, Perl, is an interpreter and can be a compiler. But doesn't it have a virtual machine element now, or is that in another part of the language? Where do we sit with that?
No, there might be something like that behind the scenes, but I'm not aware of it. I'm not much of an internals guy, so how they actually get things done behind that thing that's called Perl, I'm not entirely sure. It's not something like where you have to have a complete world for it, say like Smalltalk or some of these other languages that just want to know everything that's happening. It's basically something that you can run on, Unix, Windows, Mac, something like this, just straight on their stock operating system and get your results.
I was kind of meaning I think it's the Parrot VM for Perl 6.
Oh, were you talking about Perl 6 now?
Well, I was trying to differentiate
Oh,
between.
ah, okay.
We
So,
get into it a little bit later in the show, but
no, I can give you the quick answer on that.
yeah, cool.
So, what we're talking about now, when we say just Perl, is everyone's going to default to talking about Perl Major Version 5. In around 2000, a group of people decided that it was time for Perl to jump to its next major version. So, we have gotten Perl 0 at about 1987. I forget the year for Perl 4, but Perl 5 was 94ish, 95, something like that. And then in 2000, we're talking about what have we learned in the last 5 years? What do people want? What's the future look like? And they started work on Perl 6. Larry Wall decided it was going to be the community's rewrite of Perl. And we were going to basically have everything available to us if we wanted to change it. And that's not quite what happened in history. So, for various reasons, Perl 6 didn't really replace Perl 5. It's actually now called this language Raku, and it's its own thing, and it stands on its own. And it's nice. I like it. It has some very, very nice features. I have a book called Learning Perl 6, and we haven't updated the title yet to Learning Raku, but that's sort of gone off on its own. And I think that is the best answer for that particular language. I think standing on its own and being able to carve out its own niche in history is a good result.
That's a perfect answer.
So,
It's kind of like
yeah,
IPv4 and IPv6. They're related, but they just went off separate. Everyone's been trying to replace it.
not to sort of interrupt my answer here on that, but I just read this nice essay about that there's now a backlash against IPv6 because of just the way it's being administered. But anyway, who would have thought that like 10 years ago?
I think I'll probably do a show on that by itself because it's a
Okay.
whole
Yeah.
it's a whole thing. It's
So
really cool.
so let's go back to Perl 6 for a minute. So in 2000, we have this chance to do anything we want. We don't have to preserve backwards compatibility. We don't have to do things in the same way. And one of the main factors was that as Perl had developed and all this code had sort of accreted in the thing that makes the interpreter, is that developers were having a tougher and tougher time maintaining it. Just like, sort of any software project that lives for decades, there's going to be code eventually that you want to get rid of or behavior you want to get rid of. Anyway, one of the things that they have this idea for is this virtual machine called Parrot. Now, it started off as a joke, and I think Simon Cousins might have been the person who started it. Was why don't and I think it came from Monty Python, the Dead Parrot sketch or something like that. But why don't we have a multi-language interpreter, our virtual machine, that we can write all this stuff to, and now this new version of Perl, which would have been Perl 6, can target this VM, and Tickle can target this VM, and Java can target this VM, and Ruby, and so on. But not only that, if Perl can come in and write bytecodes for this VM can decompile it and go back out to anything it understands. One of these things was called Parrot, and that's not quite what happened. It went on for a while and finally died, or I guess it's not dead yet, or it's just resting, or whatever it is.
Well, it's important to lay that foundation of information down
Yeah.
to lead us on to Perl 7. So thanks for that explanation.
Just I'll add one more thing here. Perl 6, the Raku thing, which is not Perl 5, Raku, is on a different VM called More, which is meta object something on a runtime. So we got the same idea, but it's not in Perl 5 yet.
So a couple of important questions for new folks to Perl. Where is it used and how popular is it? Just to briefly.
Oh, geez, it'd be wonderful to know the answers to those things.
Or maybe where isn't it used?
So where isn't it used is easier. So I used to work as a radiation worker in a national lab. I had a career in physics before I got into programming, and there are all these disclaimers whenever you would write software that it's not going to be used for medical equipment, aircraft control, or nuclear power plants. So I'm pretty sure Perl's not controlling any of those things. But where it is used, I mean, I've seen it used in every sort of sector: government, academia, industry, science. It's a great way to transform data, and it almost everywhere needs to transform data. It's not as popular as it used to be, and that's no secret. I mean, I've been with Perl since the early 90s when everyone wanted to be a Perl programmer, and you could make a bunch of money if you had a pulse and you said you knew Perl, even if you didn't know Perl. From then, we have a lot more choices now. And that's when people talk about this, they forget that the decline in popularity of something also has to look at how people are choosing to solve their problems. And we have a lot more choices now. So, of course, you're not going to be king of the hill when there's so many other places people can go. PHP solved the problem that a lot of people had and they're using Perl for. So, more power to them. Python has shown up and they have a sort of a different focus in their community where they're very focused on the science side, where the libraries and the things that people want, Python is paying attention to.
Yeah, they're really heavy in machine learning, aren't they? That's
Yeah,
most of the books at the moment are about all that.
and Perl's still out there doing its job. And I answer a lot of questions on Stack Overflow, for instance, and I see a lot of people coming in with stuff about bioinformatics lately. I'm not sure why that is this summer. There's a lot of stuff, people just trying to do small jobs where they don't want to learn too much about a particular community because what they're doing with their programming is just a very small part of their job. I use it a lot with my customers who are doing data exchange between different services, business to business things, where they get in a bunch of data from some service and they need to pull out the parts that matter to them, and then they repackage that and send it on to some other service.
Yeah, it's very, very strong for being the glue of things and sort of the text transformation side of things, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have some, and Cpan, which we call the killer feature of Perl, the comprehensive Perl archive network, has tons and tons of packages for doing quite a bit of the stuff that people want to do. So if we take that away, then we're sort of really stuck. So many people have been doing Perl for so long that someone has probably done the task that you were trying to do and put that thing on Cpan, this archive network, so that you can reuse the results of whatever they're doing. And this isn't unique to Perl. Python, Ruby, Node, all these communities have this sort of thing. Curiously, this idea came not from the Perl community, but from the tech community. The layout engine from Donald Knuth. They had the CTAN, the Comprehensive Tech Archive Network, where if you're typesetting your document and you need some sort of special feature, there's probably a package on there that does it. Perl sort of copied that. And I think R has done that now too. There's a comprehensive R archive network. It makes sense that the tech people and the R people would know about each other since they're probably both in the same space.
Well, thanks for mentioning Cpan because that was one of my questions around the ecosystem, which is now Meta Cpan, isn't it? That changed this year, was it?
Well, so there's Cpan, which is just this collection of sites that rsync the same directories. And then there's these front ends to them. So there's this thing called metacpan.org, and this is a website which is sort of a user interface into these servers that are basically just big directories of packages. There's some sort of index files that let you know where to find things. A long time ago, I think the same year that we started talking about Perl 6, Graham Barr showcased this site called search.cpan.org. Cpan had gotten so big that you couldn't just go look at the list anymore and discover things that you wanted. So he had this little search engine for it. And just a couple years ago, all of that transferred to now be this new version of that called MetaCpan. I still have a fondness for the old search.cpan.org, but there's a lot of features in MetaCpan that make it very easy to get to what you want.
Yeah, me too. I remember stealing some of the CSS from it years ago, and it's just so fast. I'd like to move us along from the intro section, but just closing off with the question of what's the best way for someone new to Perl to learn it?
Well, that's a bit loaded because you're asking the person who wrote a book called Learning Perl.
That's fine, answered by me.
So there's a lot of ways that people can learn Perl. There are some online tutorials. There's my book,
The only book.
Learning Perl. Well, no, there's some other books out there. I want to be fair. There's another one that I think is good from Curtis Poe called Beginning Perl. I forget when it was published. It's probably a little bit older than the last edition of My Learning Perl.
Oh, he's got one modern Perl as well, hasn't he?
Well, so
Curtis.
there's this guy Chromatic who wrote Modern Perl.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So Modern Perl is a bit of a weird book. So let me come back to that in just a moment. So you could read Learning Perl. You could go with Beginning Perl. I mean, Curtis's book is very good. There are some online tutorials, and all of this, I have noticed this thing this summer that people have been writing to me saying that they're learning Perl from a book that we finished, more than 15 years ago when there's several editions after this. The thing that I would encourage people to do is find the most up-to-date sources you can get, and not just in Perl, but in any language. I mean, I just spent a week trying to figure out Hugo, this templating engine thing written in Go, and I had to use a particular version. But so reading older docs didn't help me. Reading newer docs didn't help me. That's one of the things to think about. But besides that, get the book, try things out, just try to program. You're going to learn a lot of stuff just by the act of actually trying to run programs. You're going to learn some about programming, just the mechanics of it, but also doing the Perl exercises. You'll learn those too. There's a website called the Perl Weekly Challenge. I think that's it, run by Mohammed Anwar. He puts up, I think I've got this right, he puts up a different problem every week and different people solve it and then explain how they solved it. And so it's also very good to look at people's examples.
Yeah, I'll make sure I get that in the show notes.
Let me say one thing about modern Perl, though. So Chromatic has written this book, and as its name suggests, it's sort of an update to how you should do Perl. A lot of people recommend that as a beginner book, but it's a very slim book, and if you read through it, it's good if you already know the language or you have some experience programming, because he quickly passes over some targets or some topics that as programmers we don't really think that much about. But I just know from teaching classes and being in front of people that things that we take for granted really trip people up until they grasp it. I mean, like the whole idea of a subroutine. If you're not a programmer and you haven't thought about this sort of thing before, that's a huge concept. Once you get it, it's very simple, but that's really the way that learning Perl is thinking about things. Is like we need to spell a lot of things out because we just don't know where you are.
Yeah, I learned Perl. It was 2004 with Learning Perl 3rd edition, which unfortunately isn't your one. But it was a very sort of nice stepping stone with each chapter building on the next. Right, I want to move us forward to the bulk of the show, which is now
Okay.
Perl 7. The next section, we've kind of crossed over this one, so that's great. So let's just get straight into the meat of the show, which is Perl 7. You did a nice intro on Perl 6 for us, which is fantastic. So it was said in the Perl 7 announcement, which I think you wrote, that Perl 7 is going to be Perl 5.32, but with different, saner, more modern defaults. Have I got that right?
Yeah, I think I put the adjectives in that order. It sounds right.
Excellent. So what are these new modern defaults, and what were they?
Okay. So we've already talked a little bit about Perl 6, and just to sort of set some context for how they want to do this in Perl 7. Perl 6 took about 15 years to get something in people's hands that they could actually use. We mentioned, and it started around 2000 where we had the idea, but I would say that the real Perl 6 effort started around 2006 when Audrey Tang made this thing called Pugs, which was a Haskell-based interpreter for Perl 6, and now people could actually start playing with code. And then it's not until 10 years later or so that they actually have a release. That's an extraordinarily long time to wait for this sort of thing. And it was because that thing I talked about earlier where everything was open to change. So we've had this pain, this particular pain where we can break anything, and we saw what happened and we saw how long it took to get something. So now let's talk about what you said about my announcement with Perl 7. Perl 5.32, Perl major version 5 with minor version 32 is out now. It was just released a couple months ago in June, I think. So we want to make this major version jump. And there's a few reasons that anyone wants to make a major version jump. First is you could say, we can do new things in this major version. We don't have to necessarily support everything in the previous major version. Okay, we've had this desire since 2000 when we wanted to do Perl 6. We just haven't been able to figure it out yet. So now we want to do this. We're at Perl 5. Perl 6 was this thing that eventually became Raku and went on to live on its own.
And at this point, Perl 5 was born in 94, so it's what, 20, 36 years?
It's old, yeah.
Yeah.
And we've learned quite a bit from there. So anyway, so next major version will be 7. But what we don't want to do is wait 15 years to put this thing out. And so we can go in the opposite direction and say what we're going to do is take what we have now, and we are just going to change the version number. So we're not writing new code. We're not rearranging a bunch of stuff. We're not inventing new stuff. We're not going to go crazy, but we're going to take this small step to put a new major version on this thing and see what that forces us to do. Now, once we do that, there are a bunch of things in Perl 5 which we mostly do now, or some people do now, I should say, but you have to turn on. Like, there is a feature called strict, which I think JavaScript has now, I heard, and maybe Python.
That's right.
Where I want to use this variable, I have to tell you I want to use this variable before I can use it. That way, if you misspell it later or use the wrong variable name or something, it yells at you. But you have to turn that on. So it would be really nice if we could that would just start being turned on. Because we tell everyone to use it all the time. We tell everyone you should always use it. You're not using this, come back when you've used it, that sort of thing. Well, let's just make it the default. But if we do that now for Perl 5 and people are still trying to run their Perl 5 programs, all of a sudden they break. There's some other things that would be very nice to get. The problem is if I start listing all these, then people are going to think that the Perl 7 developers are actually committing to these. And we actually don't know what is going to be on by default and off by default just yet because we're still talking about it.
Well, let's just say Perl 7 is coming, with the big caveat, it could all change.
Yes.
That is going to ruin all my questions, so we're just going to pretend that these things are kind of there.
So some of the things that we could turn on by default is there's this experimental feature in Perl 5 now called signatures. So if you're writing in many other languages, you know that you can give it the subroutine name and then some sort of signature that describes the parameters it can take. And then there can be some various checks based on those. In Perl, we have that feature. It's experimental, so it's not on by default, but it'd be wonderful if it was. Now, it might not be on by default in Perl 7, but now we have a chance to sort of mutate the language in a way that we can get the stuff that everyone's trying to use anyway without disturbing all of the backward compatibility that we've been committed to in Perl 5. We put that in a new major version, and it makes that a little bit easier. Again, we're not changing the code. We're not adding new features because the features are already there. We just turn them on. Now that everyone gets them for free, and if your stuff conflicts with what these defaults are, then you still have Perl 5 available. Please don't anyone upgrade anything until you've tested it, not just Perl, but any sort of language or new version of something.
So what's going to happen with Perl 5 since you just mentioned Perl 5 is still...
So the commitment that the Perl 5 porters have made, and these are the people who maintain the actual Perl interpreter, is that instead of the normal 2-year support policy we have now for any point release of Perl, like 5.32 or 5.30, they're going to extend the maintenance period for 5.32 as it is now to be very, very long. And we're talking 10, 15 years, something in that range. So we're going to keep supporting whatever the last version of Perl 5 is. So people can stay in that and have some stability. You don't have to adopt Perl this year, and then all of a sudden next year it's a whole new thing. We're going to have that available. Part of this puzzle, and this is out of the control of the people developing Perl, is that the operating systems distribute what they want. We talked a little bit about the Mac earlier.
That's what I was just going to ask.
Yeah.
They hold a lot of power, don't they?
So if you have Ubuntu, for instance, and Perl 7 exists, when you run Perl on your Ubuntu machine, which one do you get? Well, I hope that the distributions are very smart and they keep the Perl 5 one for a while. It's supported. It's people are taking care of it. It's a thing that everyone expects right now. And I also hope, and this is just a hope, my personal opinion, is that maybe there'll be this thing called Perl 7. So there's a binary on your computer that is just Perl, and that's Perl 5 like people expect. And then there's this other one, Perl 7, and you can play fancy games with the links and stuff like that if you like. And then after a while, fewer people would be using just the straight Perl 5 one. People will catch up or make their decisions about that, and the distributions can see what their particular users want.
Yeah, I think that's what Python did for quite a while, wasn't it? Python
Yes.
2.7 and then 3.x, and then you default for user bin Python or user bin Perl to a symlink to whatever
Yeah.
you want.
Yeah. So on my Mac, I have both of those Pythons. If I just say Python, I get Python 2.7 because that's what most people expect. But if I want Python 3, I just type out Python 3, and I get that. Some people have not been happy with that Python transition, but also, I mean, looking at the bright side of it, the world hasn't ended. Python has gone on. Python is still gaining in popularity. It's sometimes things are just hard and maybe a little bit uncomfortable, but life goes on.
Yeah, I experienced exactly that distro forcing upgrade that we were just discussing with Ansible in a
Oh, geez.
continuous integration, continuous deployment GitLab thing. I think it was Arch Linux. Or whatever the distro is that Docker uses as default, that switched to Python 3 and broke everything.
Well, this is an interesting case because I've been using Arch Linux on Linode just because a friend suggested it, and I'll say I've never used this before, so I'll try it out. And they are always trying to be on the latest of everything, and they seem to do a pretty good job of it. So that's different than say like a Red Hat Enterprise Edition where they're like stability, stability, stability. You get the same thing, you know exactly what you get. We're not going to change things out from under you. Versus this cutting edge, if it's new, it's there the next day or even sooner. How's that going to work out? And I think this, I mean, we don't need to do a whole podcast on this bit, but there is, this whole class of people now, DevOps and these upgraded sysadmin types who really think about this sort of stuff to provide a consistent experience, despite the fact of all the stuff that's changing everywhere in the world every day. Not just Perl, not just Node, not just your operating system, but all sorts of things get changed, and your stuff has to somehow keep working. So hopefully, I think the Perl developers are taking care of this. They're talking to the people they need to talk to in the various package managers, that we can come up with a way to give something people they expect at the same time giving them a taste of what they can get in the future.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of existing case studies to draw experience on when they do get to that.
Calling all developers. There's no telling what you can create when you upgrade your data platform to InterSystems Iris. Are you ready to build the applications you want, however you want them? Are you ready to develop applications faster than ever? Collaborate, build faster, and deploy more efficiently. Tomorrow's next breakthroughs are waiting for you today. InterSystems Iris Data Platform. Ready, set, code. Start coding for free. Visit intersystems.com/try to try Iris.
So you've mentioned strict, which is generally a mantra that you should always use in a good way. And there's another, is pragma the correct word here?
Yes. Yeah.
So that would be like using a module, isn't it? How would you describe that to people that aren't familiar with?
So there's the technical answer, and then there's sort of the social answer with this. A pragma is something like a setting. So strict, you say in a Perl program, use strict. I want to turn this feature called strict on, or use warnings, or use UTF-8, or whatever it is. I am telling the compiler to enable these features. Now, technically, these features are enabled as modules behind the scene, and a module is just a packaged little bit of code. It sits on its own.
So in other languages, you might say import or
include or something like that.
So usually when you see a Perl file, whatever form it's in, you would look to see use strict and use warnings, or another module that has a ton of defaults switched on, like a wrapper, like modern
Yes.
Perl or something. So you've already mentioned how strict might change. What would happen with warnings as well?
I think one of the options that they're looking at is having them on by default. So I would be fine with that. You mentioned some of these wrappers like Modern Perl or Mojo Base or something like this that enable a bunch of stuff for you. So you have, instead of 10 lines of boilerplate, you have this one thing that does it for you. That's fine. Warnings, I have a particular and unpopular opinion about that. This is a development tool, and if you aren't developing, then and no one's looking at the warnings or doing anything with the warnings, then they're a waste of time. Having the warnings in there is not a waste of time. Using it as a development tool is not a waste of time. But if you're sitting there in a production environment and no one's monitoring the logs, and you have a program that is spitting out, one warning every second, you're filling up your disk. You're making your logs more noisy. If you have someone that's looking at that and fixing that stuff so those warnings disappear, that's great. But I find in a lot of places, people have quite a bit to do already in their jobs, and those sort of things go by the wayside. So having it on by default would not make me personally happy, but I think it would probably make the world a little bit better. And if you want to just turn it off in production, that's very easy to do.
So the plan really is to turn on what everyone would normally turn on manually, but allow them to switch off if it's a problem.
Yes, and that's one of the big things to think about when we're looking at this scary thing called bumping your major version. We're trying to make Perl 7 the same as Perl 532, and we're just going to switch on or switch off different things. So all you have to do to get back to the old behavior is flip the various bits on those things to their original settings, which makes it very easy for us to make some sort of Perl 5 compatibility mode. How this is going to work, I don't know yet. They're talking about the particular syntax and people's preferences and stuff like that. So since Perl 7 and Perl 532 should be pretty much close to the same thing, and there's just a difference in how they set things, if Perl 7, the new thing, is reading a program and it somehow thinks that it's Perl 5, written for Perl 5, it can just say, hey, I'm going to go back to the 532 settings, and you should be fine. We don't know if that's going to require something in your Perl 5 program or a setting in your Perl 7 program yet, but that's certainly the intent. At the same time, if you're writing a new Perl 7 stuff, I think what they want people to do now is declare in this new code, this way that would really help us out is say use version 7. Now, when your Perl 5 program tries to run that, or your Perl 5 interpreter tries to run that, it sees that thing and says, oh, you're asking for 7, but I'm only 5. And it can lead you very quickly to what you need to do with that. Use a different interpreter or something like that. One of the things that a lot of people are very concerned about is how Cpan, which is all code written for Perl 5, is going to interact with this new thing called Perl 7. Well, if we get this compatibility mode right, and I don't think there's a chance that we'll get it wrong, but if we get this thing right, Perl 7, the interpreter, can read through the stuff, say, oh, you're loading a module from Perl 5. I will make the settings be whatever Perl 5 settings are, and then this stuff should be just fine. It justifiably, I think, makes a lot of people really nervous because there are a couple 100,000 packages on Cpan.
Yeah, but they're not just dumped there. There's a whole ecosystem of smoke tests and testers and automation that you could run on a copy of the whole thing or a portion of it.
And
I think it's a massive relief that you can toggle something, whether it's one way or the other, to get back to where you were for a certain period,
So this is an amazing thing about the Perl community, and especially when they got into the testing mindset. And I think Michael Schwern was a big part of this, that there are people who test all of Cpan against any new release of Perl 5. So, and we're talking, like I said, a couple 100,000 modules. So they just have these machines in the background going through testing everything. A new little bit of syntax comes out, and my module that I wrote 15 years ago breaks on this new little piece of syntax. I get an email from someone saying, hey, I tested your module on this new release of Perl, and there's this problem. Now, there's no obligation for me to go fix that. I mean, it's open source, so I could, just sort of be antisocial and let it sit. But usually the fix is very simple. I just need to adjust how I use some call or something like that, and I can release a new thing, and now my module works for the new version too. And like you said, we have this stuff in place in Perl that we can find out where the problems are very quickly. You mentioned Cpan smokers. This is a collection of machines that download or check out whatever the current branch of Perl is, whatever Perl's doing, before we've released that version and test it on all sorts of different operating systems. And these are just volunteers doing this. So we quickly get feedback from a lot of different places that, we made this small code change and add this feature. Does it work? Now, beyond that, there's a thing called Cpan Testers. So I upload a module, a third-party bit of code, onto Cpan, the Comprehensive Perl Archive Network, and immediately all sorts of machines, all from volunteers, start downloading this, testing, and sending their results back. It's brilliant that we have this, but I just uploaded a module yesterday, an update, and now I'm getting all this feedback about all these places I have failed, and I have to go debug.
Yeah, you asked for it though, didn't you?
It's a nice problem to have, though.
It's a great thing about the community. But wasn't there something last week? This is a bit of a diversion, but there was something that had some type of obfuscation in it, and it
Oh,
was the fake iPhone rooting kit or something that had been on Cpan for years, but it was so obscure.
I think you're talking about module autoload, and
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
I had never
it's
used
Friday
it,
night or something that came out.
and we don't know if anyone ever used it. So everyone who has programmed Perl has probably experienced this at some point. You try to run a program and it stops and it says can't locate blah 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 in @inc, and it gives you this big mess of stuff. Perl was looking for some module and it didn't find it, and it just complained. And the error message is very much geared towards programmers, which is not the nicest way to present information to casual programmers. So there's this thing called module auto use, which I think the intent originally was if it ran into a module you tried to use and it couldn't find it, it would do various things to make that work out. And again, I haven't looked at the code, so I don't really know what it was doing. But yeah, like you said, apparently it had some sort of malicious thing there where when it ran, this module would phone home to somewhere and then download something. And usually we have found that stuff pretty quickly because someone notices it, notifies the Cpan administrators. There's this group called PAUSE, the Perl Authors Upload Server, and those people are paying attention every day, and they quickly remove stuff like that. We've had this problem a handful of times in the past 20 years.
Yeah, it's pretty rare, and it's not like this stuff's auto-installed anywhere. You have to explicitly go and get it.
So how that one lived so long, I don't know if it was like taken over somehow and then slightly updated when no one was looking, or it's doing one of those things where in the test environment it doesn't do the bad thing.
Yeah, my point of mentioning it, other than an interesting story, is that there's a whole different cascade of teams and groups that work on this public code that everyone contributes to, and it gets found. It's not just a big pot of stuff that people upload things to.
And I'm surprised that this situation has gone on for so long. Just this group of volunteers, mostly led by this guy in Germany, Andreas Koenig. These guys started in 93 or 94 calling themselves the Perl Pack Rats. And then they just started collecting stuff. And then they made this thing that takes in the modules and puts them all somewhere. And then, like we mentioned, MetaCpan, now there's a search engine on top of that. And it's almost completely run by volunteers with no funding.
I'm not sure if there's something similar in other ecosystems, but
The other ecosystems I've seen sort of rely on GitHub, where it'll go look on GitHub for something, and just whatever the latest release or master branch is or tag or something like that is. A little harder to curate that because you don't control what's actually in the repository. It could be anything. I know other communities have had, I'm not going to call anyone out, but they've had their sort of embarrassing moments with that sort of stuff. And we shouldn't be so snide about that because it happened to us too just now.
yeah, no, we shouldn't point and laugh at anyone. Right, I'm going to do some quick fire questions just
Okay.
for some fun. So here we go. What are bare word file handles and how will they change?
Okay, so when Perl first started, it was very quick and dirty language. There's a way that we access a file, either to read to it or write to it, and that is all controlled through this thing called a file handle. A bare word file handle is one of these nice Perl variables that doesn't have the funny character up front, the thing we call a sigil. So you'd say open, and then it's usually in all uppercase, like file or FH is my favorite, or whatever you want. The problem that Perl has is figuring out what that thing is because it's going along and it doesn't have the funny character up front. So that was completely fine. And the way we did things before Perl 5.6, when we introduced the ability to put these file handles inside variables, normal variables that have a funny dollar sign out front. So if we can get rid of those, a lot of things can get simplified. I guess another good way to say this is if you've seen they're like words standard out, standard error, or standard in a program, in Perl will be all uppercase. Those are bare word file handles, and those will stick around.
Yeah, so like a macro in C parlance.
I don't know if I'd go that far, but yeah,
No,
we'll say that.
an uppercase word is what I'm trying
Yes.
to.
Oh yeah. It's an
Yeah.
uppercase word.
Okay, right. Full stop on that one.
Okay.
Next one. What are subroutine signatures and how will they change?
Okay. So right now, Perl subroutines.
Did we answer the last one actually? Are they going to change bare word file handlers? You're trying to get rid of them. That's the.
We want to turn them off so that you can't use
Okay.
them, but you can also the system ones will stick around. Okay. Signatures.
I think we touched on this earlier, didn't we? A little bit.
Yeah. So the way that Perl works now, in its sort of quick and dirty, get things done attitude, is that when you pass parameters to a subroutine, it just makes a big list of everything together and gives it to the subroutine, and the subroutine looks in this big list and then has to pick apart what belongs to what based on whatever you're doing. Signatures, most people who are programming in not Perl will probably recognize these, make a formal parameter list to the subroutine that says the first thing is this, the second thing is this, the third through fifth things are these. And so you don't have to do that inside the code at the last moment. Perl has the ability to do that. We would love to turn them on by default. I think it's unlikely that we'll get that right away for various reasons. But also, the old way will still be available. You can still do it exactly as you did before.
But at least with Perl 7, you can use that as a line in the sand to say, here's all the new stuff, and it will give people somewhere to go and look and see that all these things are available.
And I think the only thing that's really holding signatures up is that they want to add a few more niceties to it before they say this is the feature and we're going to make it on by default.
Okay, full stop on that one. What are prototypes and how will they change?
Okay, so prototypes are related to the signatures and the argument passing. So Perl being the sort of language that it is, this dynamic language, it doesn't exactly know what it's doing next because all sorts of things could have changed out from under it as it's parsing through the code. Prototypes were a way to tell a subroutine what sort of things it should expect after you call it. Like you have two arguments, or you have an array, or you have whatever. The syntax, the place that you put this prototype in a subroutine to tell it how to instruct Perl to parse is in the same place we want to put signatures. And it looks very close to the signature syntax. So what we need to do is either put this attribute in front of this thing and say :prototype, so we know that this thing is a prototype and not a signature, or not use prototypes, which is probably the better answer. So there is this little tug of war right now between prototypes, which is this old thing that I think Larry Wall always sort of envisioned turning into signatures, but did not, and signatures. And this is why signatures may not get the nod for the first go of Perl 7. We have to figure out that tug of war and how much of Cpan and users code we're going to break by making signatures the priority rather than prototypes.
So one of those two could win, or they could be merged, or something.
Yeah, we're definitely trying to get rid of prototypes, but
Okay.
How much breakage do we want to take on the first go?
We've mentioned Larry Wall a few times. Where does he sit in the whole Perl ecosystem at the moment?
right now, I sort of envision him sitting at home enjoying his life and watching his creations go out and do wonderful things in the universe. In 2000, we had this split where Perl 6 started and was going to do its thing, and Larry Wall really paid attention to that. Now, unbeknownst to us at the time, and we were on Perl 5.8 then, that invigorated a section of the Perl community, and we ended up with Perl 5.10 at the same time this Perl 6 development was going on. I think Jarkko Haientinimi was mostly responsible for that. And then Perl 5 just kept going, but Larry was paying attention to Perl 6, designing this 100-year language is what he called it.
Yeah, so if Larry's on board, then everyone pays attention. Like if Linus Torvalds did something with Linux, it's the
Yes.
same sort of power.
Yeah, and so I think, and then we had this move of governance in Perl 5 to go from Larry Wall, who is the final answer on everything, to respected individuals taking over. We had Jesse Vincent, who sort of rejiggered the entire development process for this new reality, and that was an amazing step forward. Ricardo Cygnus took it even further, and now there's this guy Sawyer X who's in charge of that.
He's the pumpkin.
What they call the pumpkin, which is this funny phrase that they took from Chip Salzenberg, I believe, where they had to share some piece of hardware. It was a printer or a tape reader or something. You can only use it if you physically possessed this little pumpkin plush toy. That way, your computer didn't stop whatever my computer was doing. But the idea there is that we sort of have this more committee geared development model. I don't really like saying it like that, but it's no longer Larry is always right. If he came back, I'm sure he would be right. But I think he's enjoying his retirement and quite proud of the 2 languages he has out there now, along with the fact that he wrote the patch command, for which I think he got some big award from some open source foundation for.
That's right. Just for the listeners, all the names that Brian's mentioning, I know because I'm in this sort of world, but they're all big famous names which would be similar in other languages, key people in the community. Well, thanks for answering that. A couple of quick fire off ones again.
Okay.
What are indirect objects and how will they change?
So the C++ programmers will enjoy this one. We're actually trying to kill off indirect objects just because it makes the parsing situation weird. Perl has a lot of little weirdities that make it difficult to parse. And I think it was Randall Schwartz who said only Perl can parse Perl.
Yeah, that's another famous one, isn't it?
But so if you make a new object, and this might be true in Java, but I haven't touched Java in a long time. You would say, variable equals new dog, for instance. So there's a dog class, and you're making a new one. So the method is before the class name. And then after that, you get your object or your instance, whatever you want to call it, in your variable, and you say that dot whatever the method name is. So when you make the thing, you have the method out front, but when you use it, you have the method at the end. In Perl, that indirect object notation is when you have that object, that method name in front of the object. And you can do that in Perl for any object. It doesn't have to be just the constructor, the new thing. We have discouraged this for years and years and years. Lots of the documentation has caught up not to use it. And if we can turn it off, that would allow, and not only turn it off, but get people to stop using it, that would allow the developers, I think, to forget about that whole class of problems in determining if we have a method call going on.
So it's kind of a heads up to say if you're using that, we're hoping to get rid of it.
Yeah, I don't think many people are, because there's almost no place that anyone sees it anymore, except maybe in some old module documentation.
Okay, so what is multi-dimensional array emulation? I like the sound of that, so I thought I'd ask. And is this new?
This one's actually kind of funny. When Sawyer told me he was going to target this as something to turn off, I had actually forgotten what this was. This is a Perl 4 thing. So Perl 4 came out in the early 90s sometime. And we had hashes and arrays, and that's it. And these arrays, it's flat. The hashes are flat. The arrays are just...
Hashes would be maps.
Yes. In fact, if they weren't even called hashes then, they were called associative arrays. Yeah. But they're like maps or dictionaries or something like that. So you couldn't do multi-dimensional structures. Like say you want to have a matrix where you have rows and columns. Well, that just doesn't work. Perl 4 had no way to do that. So what they would do is they would make a hash key where they concatenate all the dimensions, the indexes of all the dimensions, with a semicolon, and that would be the hash keys. And then there would just be a single value for that. So it looks like you have a matrix or a 3D matrix or something, but you really just have this hash with all these funny looking keys. Now, the multidimensional bit is if you gave the hash, or you gave to the hash a list for its keys instead of just a single string, it would take this list, concatenate it in this fancy way with the semicolons, and then go look for that instead of doing something else. This was a very clever trick for people to get around the fact that Perl had these sort of, what we call now primitive data structures, to do this multidimensional stuff.
So it was a stepping stone before you could do it properly.
Yeah, and the C people might even be more familiar with this because you have to do all that pointer thing, like where's the next row? Okay, jump ahead like 8 size ofs, whatever. I don't think I've ever seen anyone use it for real. I completely forgot that it even existed as a feature, but it's there. It's there for the old Perl 4 days.
There's another question that I want to quickly slip in. We mentioned objects and methods then, but what's the object-oriented world going to be like in Perl 7, or how do people want it to be? Is it going to be the separate moose, if people are familiar with that, separate ecosystem within an ecosystem, or is it going to be, because you can do object-oriented with Perl 5 since forever, but they've put all this extra easier stuff on.
So this is an interesting question.
But you give me a proper answer.
and I will try. So you said two things. You said what is it going to be and what do people want? That is the tension in all of this stuff. There's what people say they want, and then there's like what they're actually going to use. And one of the things that has held up these different object systems in Perl that you've mentioned, there's a thing called moose, and then there's a variant of that called moo, and a variant called mouse, and a variant called moo, mu, and so on.
And they're all different people's takes on how it should be done.
Yeah, but the thing is, they're all sort of clustered around some ideas. Now, there's a guy, Curtis Poe, the same guy who I mentioned before, has gone back and looked at this, and he has this proposal called CORE, COR, that he has looked at all these things and said they're all internally inconsistent in some way. They're all trying to do something, but they didn't think about this or they didn't think about that. And he's trying to pull all that into this thing, which the Perl 7 people, the guys who are actually responsible for putting this stuff into the code, have not told him no on. Now, that's a lot different than saying yes. So I don't want to get people's hopes up. That's why I say it that way. But they're definitely open to it. There's still a lot of discussion going on with that. A lot of the stuff he's done has really cleaned up a lot of the ideas that I think other people were going toward. And we'll see what happens with that. We're not going to get it right away. This jump from Perl 532 to Perl 7 should be quick, no new features, to see that we can do it, to figure out what we need to do to actually make a big jump, and then we can think about the other stuff. My take on all of this sort of stuff is that I just tend to be a lot simpler in my application of object-oriented programming. It's a set of philosophies, not necessarily a set of syntax. But that's all I'll say about that.
Yeah, I think there's a comparison, analogy, whatever you can make when you look at JavaScript world, and you've got things like React, Angular, Vue.js, if you're familiar with all that, and then they've all got their different state managers on top, and depending on what you're doing and what you like, you can reach for those different projects, which is how I see all the different object-oriented stuff for Perl. You have your core JavaScript and your core Perl 5, but you can bolt on loads of different stuff depending on what you like the look of. Is that right or wrong in that?
I think that's fair. I think often people choose the one they most agree with and then just sort of force it into whatever situation they have. Probably much like the JavaScript frameworks where, you read resumes or something, and they say, I'm an Angular developer. Well, learn some other stuff too. You put the proper tool in the proper job.
Yeah, learn different languages because you can steal stuff from all of them. So a lot of my questions in this last session we've covered off. I wanted to ask you about compatibility mode, but we've touched that. To appease anyone that's nervous about the change, you can always switch stuff on or off. That's the plan. Cpan is going to not break That's the bottom line.
Well, that's definitely our hope. We have plenty of time to figure it out.
So my final question there was, should we be worried about all of our revenue generating code, which other people call legacy, but it's where the money gets made?
So this is an interesting thing, and I like that you phrase it like that, the money making code, because what I sort of tell people when I go to consult is that if this is the stuff that's making your money, you don't want anyone else to be able to change it, which means you don't want your operating system to upgrade something out from underneath you. You don't want your language to change module versions on you. You don't want anything to change that you didn't decide to change because, like you said, that's your money. And I had one client that their website was down for a day and they estimated something like they were losing $3 million an hour. So these things are important. And if they're important enough to make you money, they're important enough for you to control, despite what Perl does. Lock that stuff down. I know a lot of people that use things like Artifactory or something else to make their own package repositories, and that's the only thing they can pull from. They know exactly which versions of everything they're using.
What was that called? Darkpan.
Darkpan, that's the phrase we use for all of the Perl code out there that we never see, and we don't know what people are doing or how they're doing it.
Okay.
And trying to support that is really interesting. And I know we're getting close to the end of the interview, so I don't want to go into all that stuff, but it's really fun to talk about maintaining Cpan. And if you wanted to really interview someone interesting on that, Neil Bowers is doing some amazing work.
Yeah, I've chatted to
on
Neil
that.
before.
He,
I don't want to make this too cliquey with everyone, but like I was saying before the show, you've been one of the guys I've been looking forward to interview, and every name you've mentioned is I know in those types of circles.
yeah, that says I don't really do anything fun or interesting or clever. I just write about what other people do.
Oh, it's all fun. So I think we've covered all the things that are out there at the moment and what's kind of happened to them. Bottom line being, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't need to worry too much if you're a user in Perl. Are there any things sort of in Perl 7 that you want people to be really excited about, or you envision a 2000.com revert, Phoenix from the fire that's going to track loads of stuff, or what do you feel about all that?
There are some things that I could be excited about that I haven't had the chance to be excited about just because I never thought Perl 5 would take this big jump. Perl 7, I'm very cautiously optimistic because it's going to be this transition step where we know that we have updated the code, that we can change the major version. We know that we can do these things. And then I think the feeling now is Perl 8 is we're going to see significant change. We know that we can do it in Perl 7. We've got all our processes in place. We figured out how to do it, and now we can just do it again with Perl 8, and now we can really break things. I would really love to see signatures, but again, might not happen for Perl 7. So, and one of the things that I'd like to leave with is I do have this book through Perl School on LeanPub called Preparing for Perl 7, which is really,
Yeah, I've got that in the show notes, and I
good.
bought it myself as well.
It's really what you need to be doing today or what practices you could be doing in Perl 5 now that can help you so that you have a seamless transition. The interesting thing about this book is each sort of feature that we've talked about has its own chapter, and I've put a status at the beginning of it: probable, unlikely, something like that. And that's sort of changing as it goes. Some things they're thinking, oh, we thought about that at first, but now it looks like it might be a tough sell. And other things that we hadn't thought about are look like they might be likely. The great thing about Perl School and LeanPub is all these things are EPUBs. So when I find out new stuff, I can just push a new version.
I could do maybe 3 shows about Perl. There's whole projects like the Modulicious web framework. There's your Perl power tools that I'll
Well,
put some notes in.
those are really Tom Christensen's Perl power tools. I just maintain the code.
Yeah, you're looking after them. I've got a ton of other stuff, but yeah, we've kind of run out of time. So obviously Perl has a bright future, and you're very much part of that. But if there's one thing a software engineer should remember from our show, what would you like that to be?
Oh, geez, from today's show and all the things we talked about,
Yeah,
I
what should float to the top?
I think that besides the fact that Perl 7 is coming in, I think it's going to be really nice, is that no matter what you're doing, what field you're in, what tools you're using, is control your tools, be up to date on what they're doing, stay up to date on them, because things are going to change in the future no matter what you're doing.
Okay, and was there anything, we've got a few minutes left, was there anything we missed that you'd like to mention? Being silly enough to miss?
I don't know. I think you've covered a lot of it. If people want to know more about Perl, they can start at www.perl.org. That's the main site. The metacpan.org is a great place to find modules. And Perl 5 recently transferred to GitHub from a private Git repo that it was using, which it had been on after being on Perforce for a long time. So you can actually go and look at this stuff. Go to GitHub at the I keep forgetting what the organization name is and what the repo name is. I get them backed up. One's Perl, one's Perl 5.
That's what Google's for, so it doesn't matter, does it?
Yeah. And there's stuff on the wiki. Todd Ronaldo, who's been leading a lot of the modernization efforts, has been keeping really good notes in the wiki, so you can see what people are talking about, how things are going, and participate at whatever your comfort level is.
Is that the best place to keep up to date with Perl 7? Or where should you subscribe to or stick around?
I don't have any good answers for that other than my Preparing for Perl 7 book, because there's this nice trade-off. You can either pay attention minutely every day, which I don't particularly like to do, or you check in every so often, but you miss a lot of stuff. And I try to, in all of my writing, including my Effective Perl Programming blog, I try to fill in that gap where you don't have to pay attention, but you're going to get the stuff you need to know.
Well, I'll do a show on Perl 8 and then we can cover off all of that. It's ready. I'll just hold my hands up.
Okay.
A few of these questions were nicked from your book. That's because it's really good quality, but we didn't have that much time to go too deep. So people can follow you on Twitter, but how else do you like people to get in touch, or do you like people getting in touch?
I do stuff on Twitter. I don't often carry out conversations there. They can DM me if they like, but my email is easy to find. I put it everywhere, so people can email me directly if they like. I'm on Stack Overflow, on Reddit, and all these places. If you're reading about Perl, you've probably run across me there. I tend to take communication any way that people want to do it, just because trying to make people do it the way I like tends not to work out. Just let them do whatever they're comfortable with, and I'll try to adapt to it.
Excellent answer, thanks. Brian, thank you for coming on the show.
Yes, thank you.
It's been a real pleasure. And this is Gavin Henry for Software Engineering Radio. Thank you for listening.
Developers, take your marks. It's time to upgrade your data platform to InterSystems Iris. It's time to deliver complex mission-critical applications in the fastest route possible. It's time to use any data from any source. It's time to embed analytics and create interactive user interfaces. So what are you waiting for? Choose your language, choose your tools, choose your environment. Collaborate, build faster, and deploy more efficiently. Done and done. Tomorrow's next breakthroughs are waiting for you today. InterSystems Iris Data Platform, the fastest way to build applications. Ready, set, code. Start coding for free. Visit intersystems.com/try to try Iris. Thanks for listening to SE Radio, an educational program brought to you by IEEE Software Magazine. For more about the podcast, including other episodes, visit our website at se-radio.net. To provide feedback, you can comment on each episode on the website or reach us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or through our Slack channel at seradio.slack.com. You can also email us at team@se-radio.net. This and all other episodes of SE Radio is licensed under Creative Commons License 2.5. Thanks for listening.